Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Power podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to impact and upgrade your everyday life. How do you have a conflict in a way that doesn't strain the relationship? So what we're gonna look at is, how and when to disagree. But before we do that, we're gonna take a look at relationships. So, and this is any type of relationship. So the text that we're gonna read from is from a part of the Talmud called the oral law, which is called Pirkei Avot, which means the ethics of the fathers, and it's the part of the writ of the oral law that focuses on Jewish values and ethics.
Love that is dependent on something. When the thing is gone, the love is also gone. But if it is not dependent on anything, it never ceases. What love was dependent on something, the love of Amnon and Tamar, and one that was not dependent on anything, the love of David and Jonathan. Any dispute that is for the sake of heaven will have a constructive outcome. One that is not for the sake of heaven will not have a constructive outcome, which is a dispute that is for the sake of heaven. The dispute between Hillel and Shammai. What is the dispute that is not for the sake of heaven? The dispute of Korach and his company.
Thank you. So it's interesting. It's talking about relationships. It doesn't just mean romantic relationships. It means any sort of relationship where there's love involved, right? What is the key to longevity in a relationship? It's saying that it has to be a love that's not dependent on anything. What does it mean that a love that's dependent on something? What sort of love? Give me some real life examples.
I love you because you have a lot of money.
Beautiful example.
That the person's going to need something that you want from them.
Or that the love is reciprocated, that the person you love loves you back.
So I think that's a little bit different than what it's talking about here. But I think let me just try and tease apart what Renee said and what Esther Naomi said and show the difference. Is it because when you sit down to a delicious meal of steak, for example, right? People will sit down to it and say, "Oh, I love steak." Do they actually love steak?
No.
What do they love?
The sensation of the steak in their mouth.
How they feel when they're eating steak. And sometimes that translates in relationships, right? People will turn around to someone else and say, "I love you." And really what they love is, "I love how I feel when I'm with you. We have so much fun together." And I think that's what Renee was saying, is that there's an expectation that when I'm with you, I'm going to feel whatever it is. I'm going to have fun with you. There's going to be pleasure, whatever it is that's the expectation. I think that the idea of reciprocal love is not contradictory to unconditional love, right? Because really what the Mishnah is talking about here is this concept that in order for a relationship to last, there's got to be an unconditional love in it, right? Otherwise, and it makes sense, right? Because if the love is conditional on something, right? Let's take Jackie's example. I love you because you have a ton of money and you're generous with your money, right? And you go on a cruise and you invite me to come along, right? Now, what happens when the person, God forbid, loses the money or loses their generosity? The relationship suffers, because all of a sudden the reason for your love is no longer there. So one of the examples that the Mishnah gives is that one of Amnon and Tamar. What was the story of Amnon and Tamar? Amnon was very attracted to Tamar and he lusted after her. And then they were intimate, and then he hated her. His love turned to hatred. Why? Because the only thing that was building that love was his physical attraction to Tamar. And as soon as that was satisfied, there was nothing left, and his love turned to hatred. So it's using that as an example and kind of saying that this is an example of a love that's conditional. It's based on something. And then it contrasts us with another love. And this love is a love between two people that really shouldn't have happened. So who is it? It's the love between David and Jonathan. David and Jonathan were best friends. Who were they? David was going to be the king, King David, and Jonathan was the son of King Shaul. Now, really, the way it should have gone was King Shaul his son should have become the king, the next king. So really, Jonathan should have been the next king. King Shaul sinned, and God said to him, because you sinned, your family is going to lose the line of kingship, and I'm going to choose someone else. Now, King Shaul didn't know who was going to be the next king. King Shaul didn't know that King David was chosen by God to be the next king, but Jonathan did know. And despite that, they had a love for each other, right? Friends, they were best friends. They looked out and they loved one another. And why did they love one another?
Because they unconditionally accepted each other.
There's an unconditional love for the person and who they are. And that's why this love, this relationship lasted, even though logically it didn't make sense for that relationship to last. So what we kind of see here is that in order for a relationship to last, it has to be based on some sort of unconditional love. Now, let me ask you a question. Think about your relationships for a moment. Where do our relationships lie, most of them? Do they lie in the unconditional love or the conditional love or somewhere in between?
I think they probably run the gamut.
The Mishnah is using two extreme examples, right? And most of our relationships lie somewhere on that continuum. Now, what I think the Mishnah is challenging us to do is to kind of think to ourselves that if we want our relationships to have longevity, we have to move towards more of that selfless love. So that's my question to us all, right? How do we move towards having more selfless love? It's interesting, Judaism doesn't teach us that you give up yourself in relationships, right? For example, the word for marriage in Hebrew, nisuim, which if you translate that word literally, it's the plural of carrying, right? What does it mean? In biblical Hebrew, when you have one word which has multiple meanings, there's always a connection between the multiple meanings. So what does it mean? It means that the Jewish ideal in a marriage is two people that turn around to each other and say, I will carry you no matter how heavy you get. And it's the ideal in a relationship is that it's mutual, right? The ideal is not that one person says, I'll carry you no matter how heavy you get, and the other one's like, great, I'll take as much as I can get from you, right? It's two people that turn around to each other and say, I'm going to give whatever I can to this relationship, and whatever, if 100% doesn't work, then we'll figure it out. But it's a very different way of approaching relationships. It's that yes, we don't lose ourselves within a relationship, but we lose our selfishness. And so how do we move more towards unconditional love?
Well, I think for me, it's realizing how I want to be loved. And so I want to be loved unconditionally, then I have to love others the same way.
Any
I
other
think
thoughts?
it often
Yes.
starts to some extent in self-love, because I think it's very difficult to love unconditionally if you can't love yourself unconditionally. It's sort of like the bedrock of your relationship with the world.
Beautiful. And there's actually a source for that in the Torah, because we have a mitzvah, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, right? To love others as you love yourself, right? Now, you can't just turn around and say, well, I don't love myself, so I don't have to love anyone else. The commandment is that you have to love others and as much as you love yourself, and you have to work on self-love as well. Any other thoughts, any other ideas? And what can help us move towards more unconditional love?
This might be all, but I think it's not to have expectations. And I don't mean like you're gonna be in an abusive relationship, but a lot of times, let's say you have a birthday party for someone that you love, and then you think that when it's your birthday, they're gonna have a party and you don't. So when you do something because you love unconditionally or you want to be kind, you don't do it thinking there's gonna be reciprocal, might be the right word. So to let go of the expectations that everything you're gonna put out there is gonna be given back in the same exact way, helps you love unconditionally and be satisfied that you gave the party because you wanted to, not because you expected something.
I think that's a beautiful point, right? And it kind of highlights what it's saying, right? When you give something because you expect something back, then it becomes conditional, right? It becomes, this is the expectation. It's hard to get to a place where we don't have expectations. And when we can let go of it and recognize that people give in different ways, what's actually interesting about love and relationships is, again, the Hebrew word for love is, which comes from the root hav, which means to give. What's the connection between love and giving?
You have to give in order to love.
So sometimes we think that we give to the people that we love, but what actually happens, or if Dessler actually tells us about this, is that through giving, we build love. And someone mentioned earlier the unconditional love that a parent has for a child. If you think about it, that's what happens in that sort of relationship, right? A parent has a child. What does the child give to the parent?
In the beginning.
In the beginning,
Sleepless nights.
sleepless nights, right? Nothing, right? Aggravation. As they get older, more aggravation, right? But you know and the parent has like intense love for this child, right? Because why? Because the act of giving is what's building that love. And perhaps that's something for us to bear in mind, is that the more we can move towards unconditional love, and we could do that by giving to other people. And it doesn't have to be big things, right? It could be small things, right? Thinking of someone, giving something small, you know, a text, a call, or something small throughout the day, but that constant thinking about what can I do for the other person in this relationship, that kind of solidifies that relationship and helps it have more longevity. I think you're raising a really good point, and I think it segues into the next part of what we're going to talk about, right? And I think perhaps it's a little bit of an art that we've lost nowadays, is that we can love someone unconditionally without agreeing and accepting everything they do. I think that's the kind of love that Hashem models for us. God loves us. Does he agree and accept everything that we do? No, right? And when a long time ago we did that course on the 6 constant mitzvahs and what it means to have awe of God, right? God expects things from us, but God has an unconditional love for us. He doesn't agree and accept everything we do. So I think those two things can coexist. As a people today, I think we're losing the art of how to do that. But that's kind of looks into the next thing. Okay, what about disputes? What about conflict? You know, something goes wrong in a relationship, or something that someone else does upsets you. Should we talk up about it? What do you think the best way to handle that is?
Depends what it is. Depends if it's like a minor thing, it can be overlooked. But if it's something that like feels hurtful, then I think it's important to tell the other person.
Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, so let's look at what the Mishnah says. And I think this one's a little bit trickier to understand. It says that any dispute that is for the sake of heaven will have a constructive outcome. What does it mean that a dispute's for the sake of heaven?
For a higher purpose.
Beautiful, beautiful. So give me a practical example or a real life example of when you disagree with someone for a higher purpose.
I had a disagreement with somebody who's on a board, but we're both board members, and this person was doing something that was really, really annoying and counterproductive and just not professional. And I thought about it for days because I couldn't figure out how to address the issue. And finally, the approach I came up with was, your behavior, talking to this person, is not productive, and it's not helping other board members to, you know, come into their role. It's not serving a higher purpose of our functioning, you know, in a productive, constructive, professional way. And he was able to hear it. And he was like, yeah, you're right. And he owned it. So, but it took me 5 days to figure out.
That's beautiful, because I think you highlighted something very important there, and that is the intention of it. Right? Or the examples of a board, right? Like sometimes there's conflict on a board. And why is the conflict on the board? Is because there's too much ego involved, right? There's, this person wants to be the one who's giving the ideas and running the show, and this person wants to do it, and then there's just a conflict of that. And usually what happens when there's a conflict like that, when there's a lot of egos involved, there's a fallout, right?
And the board stops functioning.
The board stops functioning, right? But here there was a higher purpose. The purpose wasn't, I want to be right. The purpose was, I want to find a better way for our board to function.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the Mishnah is telling us, is that when the dispute is for the sake of something higher, right? The sake of finding the truth, finding a way forward, then it's going to have a constructive outcome. And what example does it give? It gives the example of Hillel and Shammai. Now, I don't know if you've heard of Hillel and Shammai before, but Hillel and Shammai were two rabbis that argue it out in the Talmud. And what's interesting about them is that they never come to a resolution. They don't agree with each other, right? They argue it out. For example, one example of this is when it comes to lighting Hanukkah candles. So Hillel and Shammai had a disagreement about how do we light Hanukkah candles? Do we light one on the first day and then add one on every day? Or do we start with 8 on the first day and then go down and detract 1 each day until we end with 1 on the last day? Hillel said, we do 1 and then we add on every single day. And Shammai was like, no, you do 8. And they both had a reason for what they was. And they never came to a resolution. And when the Mishnah is saying that it had a constructive outcome, it's saying that nowadays, yes, we follow what Hillel told us to do. But we still learn from Shammai. Because Shammai's opinions held a lot of weight, and they teach us so much. So it's showing us that here you have these two rabbis that fought it out, and yet they remained contemporaries, right? They weren't at odds with each other. They got on with each other, and it's not even necessarily about coming to an agreement together. You can agree to disagree with someone else, but it's when the purpose of the disagreement is for the sake of a higher purpose, for the sake of finding the truth, finding a way forward, then you'll have a constructive purpose. If the purpose of the argument is that I want to be right, then you're not going to have a constructive argument. And what does it give us? It gives us a fascinating one. It says the disputes of Korach and his company. Now, what was the story there? Is Korach was upset that Moshe, when Moses was giving out the leadership positions, he gave it to Moses and to Aaron, his brother, and to his nephews. And why did he do it that way? Because God told him these are going to be the leaders. But Korach went around and he told people, Moses is just giving the leadership positions to his family. So if you come with me, I will fight Moses to make sure that the leadership gets distributed equally. What was the driving force of his argument? Like what was driving him?
Ego.
Jealousy, right? Ego, jealousy, because he didn't get a leadership position. And what's interesting here is that the Mishnah doesn't say the dispute of Korach and Moshe, right? Because really that's what it should say. It should say Korach. And who was he arguing against? He was arguing against Moshe, but it's almost irrelevant who he was arguing against. It's talking about Korach and his people because the argument there was not who's right. Is Korach right or Moses right? The argument there was, I feel left out of the leadership. My ego is being hurt. I doubt it was said in that many words, but that was the driving force about it. Bring it back to us. Again, I think a lot of times, is it easy to tell when our arguments are for a higher purpose?
If you're someone who's insightful and working on yourself,
What are some clues to ourselves that this is, I'm in it because there's a higher purpose here, or I'm in it just to be right?
One clue that I've experienced is, oh, I want to respond right away. And if I have a feeling that I want to respond right away, it's like, uh-oh, that's a red flag. I need to step back. I need to think about this. But it's that feeling of I need to do it right now.
Yeah, there's very few things
Like
that
a
it's
gut
urgent.
reaction.
Yeah.
I
Thank you.
physically feel it in my body. Like that's
Yeah.
how I know. I physically feel it in my body when it's not coming from a good place.
Mhm.
Like I don't know, it probably feels different for everyone, but for me, it feels like a rush of heat to my head when I feel that place.
The other way to think about it is that the higher purpose could be the relationship. In other words, if you do what needs to be done in the service of the relationship to help it, repair it, build it, grow it, whatever, that comes from a very different place than from an emotional state of mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and that is because I think what you're pointing out is a good point. The Mishnah is not saying like don't argue, don't, there's a conflict, like don't say anything, right? That's not what it's saying. It's saying that there has to be the intention has to be for a higher purpose. And I think one of the other ways that the clues for ourselves of where am I in all this is how we feel towards the other person, right? Am I feeling angry and hateful or vengeful or rageful or whatever the word is that you want to use towards the other person? Then there's probably something that needs to be tweaked a little bit. If I'm feeling not like that, right? If I'm feeling like I still respect this other person, again, it depends what the person's done, but I still respect the humanity of the other person, but this is an issue that needs to be resolved, then that's much more of a clue to us that maybe I have a higher intention here. And I think that's what's fascinating about the rabbis in the Talmud, because if you look through the Talmud, it's full of rabbis arguing and arguing and arguing, right? There's conflict all the way through. But these were people that respected each other, right? Judaism isn't saying, don't discuss and don't argue and don't think, but respect the other person's humanity. Respect that this person, and I think sometimes that, when I said it's a little bit of a lost art today as well, right? We can respect someone else and respect that they also want what's good for the country, but they just have a different way of voting, for example, right? It doesn't mean that because that person did X, Y, Z, or thinks in this Y, Z, that they're a terrible person and they're wrong and whatever. It's we can. I'm getting into hot water here, very hot water. But it's a fascinating idea, is that you can disagree vehemently with someone else and still maintain a relationship with them. If we can take that step back and say, what is my higher purpose here, right? My higher purpose is, and I'll just throw out some examples, to keep my child safe, to teach my child how to function in society, right? To teach my child respect, whatever it is. Then if we can do that, we can turn around and say, now what's the most effective way to do it? Is the most effective way to yell at her? Probably not. Is the most effective way to sit down in a calm moment and discuss and tell her why, that this is what's going on and this is what happens? Probably, right? And I'm giving a very simple example, but I think in our personal relationships, I happen to agree with you. I think for myself as well, I find it's a lot harder to do it in personal relationships because emotions are much higher and it's personal, right? It becomes personal. But if we can actually step back and say, like, what's the higher purpose of this, right? What's the higher purpose? If I'll give you a stupid example, right? Let's say the spouse is constantly leaving his dirty socks around. And you're like, what's the higher purpose of it? Is the higher purpose that because every single time I walk past it, it drives me mad and it builds resentment? Then maybe the higher purpose in that conflict is to actually turn around and say, look, this is something that's important to me. This is what's going on. This is what it's like for me. How do we resolve it? And maybe the resolution is that, like, I try and ignore and he tries to pick up the socks, etc. But when we can take that step first and say, what's my purpose here, right? Is my purpose here because, like, how dare you, and I'm going to show you, right? That's a recipe for conflict. But if there's a higher purpose in that, and the higher purpose can be different, if we can actually take that step and say, what is the purpose of it? What is the purpose of this interaction I'm going to have? And I think it can help us center and find a higher purpose and find a better way, which is probably what you did sort of intuitively, Lorraine, when you went through that process of, like, this is why it's bothering me. How do I address it? Thanks. Just to summarize, right? I think the connection between both these different parts is showing us that when we can have something bigger than just ourselves, that's going to create longevity in a relationship, and that's going to help us resolve conflicts in a healthier way.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy, and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avot. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.